Hey guys, tonight we slip into silk sheets still warm from whispered betrayal, past flickering candelabras and the faint scent of rosewater mixed with something muskier, perhaps sign, perhaps politics. You step lightly across creaky parquet floors, deeper into a boudoir where history never wore a petticoat. This is not your grandmother's Paris. This is the underbelly of Versailles. The powder-drenched parlors of old regime courtesans who knew that if you couldn't inherit power, you could always seduce it. And maybe, if you were clever enough, you could make it wear what you designed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from and what time. It is there. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing now in the alley behind, a Parisian salon circa 1670, where laughter filters through velvet drapes and chamber music disguises the real transaction, secrets for survival. A stray rat skitters past your boot. The scent of stale piss from the street mingles with jasmine perfume wafting from an open window. You don't belong here, but then again, neither did they. The courtesans, women without titles, often without last names, who rose from laundresses and opera dancers to bed kings and bankrupt dukes. And in doing so, they rewrote the manual on how a woman could not only live but live luxuriously. Historians still argue whether the true heart of French culture beats in its palaces or its parlors. But you already know. It's here, in the soft rustle of silk against bare thigh, the calculated raise of a plucked brow, and the whispered suggestion of what might happen after dessert. She doesn't look powerful. This woman you're watching through the candlelit window. She's reclining in a chair that costs more than your rent, wearing a dressing gown more suggestive than any nudity, and laughing just a little too loudly at a viscount's joke. But she's already won. He'll go home tonight and tell his wife nothing. Tomorrow he'll tell his tailor everything, what color she wore, how her bodice curved, what fabric she touched. And that's how fashion spreads in Paris, not from the queen's closet, but from a courtesan's bed. You probably won't survive this century, by the way. If the syphilis doesn't get you, the fashion debt might. There's something deliciously unstable about this moment in history. The old aristocracy still thinks bloodlines are everything, while the new elite of salons and stage performers understand that stories sell faster than surnames. And fashion? It becomes the language between them. Here, a hemline means availability. A certain shade of violet whispers, taken by royalty. A pearled necklace doesn't just say wealth, it says proximity to scandal. Paris becomes a catwalk of innuendo, and the courtesan is both model and message. You catch your breath as the woman in the chair tilts her head, letting her hair tumble in a carefully imperfect wave down one shoulder. That gesture alone will be copied 100 times by dusk tomorrow. Sex here is not just for pleasure. It's currency, it's influence. According to Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings, it's a resume. The right affair, the right scandal. And suddenly a woman with no title becomes the most talked about figure in court, without ever having to attend. This isn't soft power, it's silk power. These women aren't just sleeping with nobles. They're laundering reputations, brokering introductions, choosing their clients as carefully as any businesswoman selects her investors. Their bedrooms are war rooms, their wardrobes. Carefully curated propaganda. You pause outside the salon. A moment longer, wondering how something as frivolous as a ruffled sleeve could shift the politics of an empire. But then again, who do you think invented the trend of wearing mourning lace for a lover who wasn't actually dead? Or the sheer chemise that makes accidental nudity seem like art? These aren't coincidences. They're tactics. These women understood that fashion was the only kind of speech that couldn't be censored, and gossip the only weapon that didn't require permission to fire. Of course, not every story ends in pearls and perfume. One tale, buried in Peter, webs the erotic spirit through history, tells of a courtesan named Leanne who seduced a cardinal, only to be strangled with her own garter after he panicked about public exposure. Her ghost supposedly still haunts Rue de Bussy, whispering fashion advice to unlucky lovers. Quirky? Sure, but also a grim reminder that this glamour had fangs. You couldn't just wear beauty. You had to survive it. And as you finally turn away from the window, it dawns on you, this isn't about clothes or sex. It's about transformation, reinvention, escape. It's about how women outside the system twisted that very system into a mirror and forced it to admire them. One stolen glance at a boudoir window and you're already infected. Paris has always known how to seduce. But tonight, you begin to learn how seduction became an industry, and how the women who mastered it stitched their names into history's very seams. She doesn't arrive in a royal carriage, and there's no trumpet announcing her entrance, but when Ninon de l'Enclos glides into a salon, even the conversation changes temperature. You're seated in a smoky Parisian drawing room, 1650s, where philosophers flirt and poets beg for patronage, and in walks Ninon like she owns the air. She smells faintly of ambergris and defiance. You've heard of her, of course. Everyone has. The courtesan who outlasted 3 regimes and buried her lovers with style. She's not just beautiful, she's intellectually dangerous, which, in this room, is hotter than cleavage. She doesn't just lie with men, she rewires their entire belief system. A sharp laugh, a well-timed quip, and suddenly the Duke of Saint Simon is quoting Voltaire like it's foreplay. What Ninon wears will be copied in every theater box by next week, but it's the way she speaks that turns heads first. Unlike many women of her class, Ninon never married, never depended on a man to define her status, and never apologized for her pleasure. In fact, she keeps a list, an actual written list of her lovers, from poets to princes, each ranked not by wealth or fame, but by conversational stamina. And while historians still argue whether she was more libertine than courtesan, what's clear is that Ninon played the long game, investing her charm where it paid dividends in influence. That wig she wears, custom powdered with lavender ash. Those silk slippers, imported via a client from Venice. But more than that, she knows how to listen and then leak. Not to ruin reputations, but to raise her own. In a time when women's voices are censored, she becomes the original content creator. Her salon's the proto-Twitter threads of their day. Gossip, after all, is just curated information with good lighting. There's a story possibly exaggerated, but that's half the point. That one evening, a young nobleman tried to woo Ninon with a ruby necklace. She accepted the gift, then handed it to his wife the next day, saying, "Your husband's taste is better in jewelry than conversation." Instead of being banished from society, she was toasted at every salon for the rest of the month. And that's the twisted logic of Parisian high society. If you're scandalous enough, you become indispensable. Ninon didn't invent this system, but she refined it. Her wardrobe was always slightly ahead of its time. Shorter sleeves when long ones were in, unboned bodices just shy of indecent, and an infamous shade of emerald green that trended so hard it sold out dye merchants across the city. She wasn't a fashion designer, but designers began to orbit her. She made looks happen. What's more, she made them talk. You realize, sitting there sipping watery wine and eavesdropping on a debate about Descartes, that this isn't about appearance, it's strategy. Every garment on Ninon is a conversation piece. And conversation is currency. According to Michel Foucault, in The History of Sexuality, the 17th century marked a shift in how sexuality was surveilled and discussed. Where once sin was private and shameful, it now became performative, politicized, even theatrical. And courtesans like Ninon were on the front lines of this cultural shift. By occupying spaces meant for men philosophical debates, literary salons, musical premieres, She redefined the limits of female presence. She became what some scholars call a public woman, not just in the euphemistic sense, but literally. Her persona was curated for public consumption. She wasn't hidden, she was hyper-visible. And in that visibility, she carved out a strange, potent kind of power. You lean closer, watching her as she leans against the fireplace, one slipper peeking out from under her skirts, and you catch a fringe detail, a gold-threaded symbol stitched subtly along her hem, something Greek, possibly Dionysian. A wink to those in the know. And that's the thing, Ninan's fashion wasn't just provocative, it was encoded. Layers of meaning, symbolism, private references. She made fashion smart. Not just for seduction, but for self-definition. There's even a tidbit, maybe just urban myth, that she once hosted a masquerade where every guest had to wear an outfit representing their worst secret. Imagine that. A room full of walking confessions stitched in brocade. One man arrived dressed as a confessional booth, another as a drowned child. It was the talk of Paris for weeks, and no one ever admitted what Ninan herself wore. But as you watch her now, still radiant at 50, still smirking like she knows something the men don't, you realize she didn't just attend salons, she was the salon. And in her world, fashion was a form of authorship. It let her write herself into spaces that denied her paper or ink. Even after her death, the will she left behind caused an uproar. She donated a fortune to the son of one of her former lovers, Voltaire. The philosopher would later say she taught him wit and skepticism, which, let's be honest, sounds like a euphemism for something far more interesting. So next time you think of fashion as fluff, remember Ninan de l'Enclos. She made satire wearable, turned banter into currency, and seduction into public policy. And you're still lurking in the corner, pretending you're just here for the wine. But you know better now. The clothes on her back are more than adornment, their armor, press release, and battle cry. You wake to the sound of heels tapping against polished marble, and the scent of freshly crushed roses, overripe and aristocratic. You've arrived in the royal court of Versailles, and there she is, Madame de Pompadour, descending a staircase not like a mistress, but like a sovereign in her own right. You expect something scandalous, perhaps a slip of silk too sheer for morning light, but what she's wearing is even more dangerous. Perfection. Every pleat in place, every ribbon knotted with intent. Her face, a powdered mask of symmetry, and yet her eyes glint with strategy. You recognize instantly this is not a woman who plays court politics. She is the court politics. And tonight, she's wearing war paint disguised as Rococo flair. It's hard to overstate just how unnatural her rise was. Born Jean Antoinette Poisson, yes, her last name literally means fish. She wasn't even noble, just smart, brilliant, actually, and charming in a way that could be weaponized. Louis XV made her his official mistress not just because she was beautiful, but because she could talk about Voltaire without blinking and sketch architectural designs that made the king sigh. She didn't merely entertain, she enlightened. But Versailles is not kind to women who step out of line or worse, step ahead of it. So how does she survive 15 years in a position that usually devours its holders in 3? She masters optics. Fashion for Pompadour is not just beauty. It's defense. It's narrative control. Every ensemble a coded message to her enemies. I see you, I'm still here, and by the way, your dress is outdated. Her signature style blends innocence and allure, pastel shades, delicate embroidery, floral motifs, but every fold hides a calculation. Her gowns are as much about deflection as seduction. They say, I'm too elegant to be political, while she bankrolls philosophers, censors pamphlets, and installs ministers. Historians still argue whether Pompadour wielded real political power or merely curated its illusion. But even they agree, no one turned fashion into a chessboard better than her. Take For example, the Pompadour pink, a shade she helped popularize, soft, romantic, seemingly harmless. And yet it floods Versailles like propaganda. Portrait after portrait depicts her swathed in it, radiant, untouchable. Women at court scramble to match it, while whispering behind fans. But what they don't grasp is that by copying her, they're conceding she's defined the terms. The same goes for her hair, teased and piled high into styles that flirt with absurdity. You assume it's vanity until you realize the height of her coiffure rises in tandem with her political influence. Pompadour quite literally elevates herself above the other women, an inch at a time. Her portraits become so iconic that tailors start naming designs after her. Pompadour sleeves, Pompadour fans, even Pompadour heels. And just like that, a courtesan becomes a brand. And brands, as you know, outlast scandals. One night, during a masked ball at Versailles, Pompadour allegedly arrived dressed as Diana the Huntress, bare shoulders, a bow slung across her back, and a wolfskin cloak over her hips. It was a bold choice, hinting not only at power but chastity, a woman above the messy politics of sex. And though she hadn't shared the king's bed in years, she still held his ear and his loyalty. It's one of the great paradoxes of her reign. She stays mistress long after the mistressing stops. How? By making herself irreplaceable in every other domain: art, architecture, diplomacy, even interior design. She curates Versailles like a gallery. Her tastes become court tastes. You find yourself wondering, as she glides past you in another impossibly perfect silk brocade, whether she's dressing for the king or dressing to remind the court she doesn't need him anymore. There's a particularly juicy tale found in Sex with Kings about how Pompadour once commissioned a set of erotic engravings, not for the king, but for her own amusement. Each image depicted a mythological seduction, but with the man in a position of vulnerability. The images never made it to public circulation, of course, but copies survived. And behind closed doors, it's whispered she used them to instruct younger courtesans, not just in pleasure, but in power. That's the thing about Pompadour. She doesn't just survive the game. She rewrites the rulebook. And every stitch of clothing she wears is a footnote to that rewrite. You notice a fringe detail on her sleeve, a lace pattern shaped like peacock feathers. A nod to vanity, perhaps. Or dominance. Or maybe just another layer in her narrative. One you'll never fully decode. She smiles once at you, not quite kindly. You're not a threat, after all. You're just a spectator in a world where clothing can kill softly, where fabrics whisper loyalties, and where a fish-named girl from Paris became the single most stylish weapon of the Ancien Regime. You think of her legacy, how her name still echoes in salons, in hairdos, even in the tailored curve of a designer jacket, and you realize Pompadour never really left Versailles. She's just hiding in the seams. It begins with a whisper behind a fan, a glance across a ballroom, and a note passed under a wine-glass. Parisian seduction at its most theatrical. Tonight, you're not just watching the drama unfold, you're dancing in it. The chandeliers above are dripping with candlelight, powdered wigs bob in rhythm. And somewhere across the room, someone just dropped a glove with strategic clumsiness. Welcome to the masked ball, where no one is who they seem, and everyone is for sale. Here, gossip is louder than the music, and the richest currency is not gold, but rumors. What you wear might determine who offers you a country estate, or who ensures your swift exile. And in this shadow play, the courtesans are more than entertainment, they're diplomats in silk. One wrong curtsy, and you've insulted a duke. One well-timed glance, and you've started a war. You scan the crowd for her, the woman they say ended 3 engagements in a single night, and still went home with a bishop's promise in her pocket. There she is. Eyes outlined in kohl, her mask shaped like a serpent. A gown that glitters not just with beads, but with implication. You can't see her face, and that's exactly the point. Anonymity here is not concealment, it's freedom. Her perfume, jasmine. And something darker, maybe civet wraps around your senses. When she turns, the room pivots with her. This is sex diplomacy at its peak, and she is fluent in every dialect. What she wears tonight, a custom Venetian silk laced with peacock blue trim, will be copied by a dozen duchesses tomorrow, most of whom will deny they ever saw her. But they'll remember, especially the fan. Black lace held with a gloved hand, fluttering once, then again. You wonder, is that a signal? Of course it is. Every movement here is code. According to Peter Webb's The Erotic Spirit Through History, the fan alone had a full vocabulary cover the left eye, and you're watching with interest. Touch the cheek, and you're waiting to be approached. Close the fan sharply, and you've just ended a conversation before it began. Who needs words when silk speaks louder? There's a fringe theory, not entirely dismissed by historians, that some of these courtesans were embedded informants, paid not just for pleasure, but for access. After all, what better way to sway a nobleman's loyalty than postcoital suggestion? Whispered against his bare shoulder. France's enemies knew it too. One case buried in diplomatic letters details a Prussian agent sent to bribe a famous Parisian courtesan with jewels, in exchange for pillow talk about naval routes. She accepted the jewels, naturally, and then reported the agent's name to 3 separate ministers, selling him out for triple. Your heels click as you shift on the parquet floor, and you feel it again. This city isn't run by kings. It's run by conversation, and the best talk happens when no one's fully dressed. Tonight, even the furniture is part of the act velvet. Settees positioned at just the right angle for an accidental touch. Candle holders casting flattering shadows. Drapery thick enough to hide eavesdroppers. You see a noblewoman laugh too loudly, catch her own reflection, and suddenly shift her posture to match the courtesans. Imitation is flattery, but in Versailles, it's also self-preservation. You catch a glimpse of a note tucked into a garter strap. A message? A bill? A threat? You'll never know. But she knows you saw, and that's enough. You're meant to be curious. That's part of the seduction. Historians still argue whether the art of gossip truly originated with these women, or if they simply turned it into a science. But they agree on this. They made it fashionable. Literally. The color of your dress could reference an affair. A certain cut implied availability. And accessories? Don't even get started. A ruby ring on the left hand might say, owned by nobility, while a brooch in the shape of a dagger could say, recently widowed, ... maybe. There's a legendary encounter recorded in one of the less formal memoirs of the period. A courtesan only ever referred to as La Lune attended a masked soiree in a dress embroidered with scenes from Greek mythology. But when examined closely, each myth subtly referenced a scandal involving a member of the court. The implication? She knew everything, and no one dared call her out, for fear she'd start naming names aloud. The next day, 2 marriages ended, 1 affair relocated to Italy, and 3 tailors were booked solid for 6 weeks. Everyone wanted embroidery with plausible deniability. You can't stop staring. The woman in the serpent mask has just leaned in close to a general, her finger tracing the edge of his metal. He's sweating, and not just from the fire. She whispers something, then walks away. He follows. They disappear behind a curtain, and you hear nothing but the flick of that fan, folding closed. Somewhere behind you, someone murmurs that she's married to a Dutch merchant, but her real husband is power. You believe it. And as the night winds down and masks come off, you realize you've been seduced, not just by beauty, but by the machinery behind it. Fashion, fragrance, flirtation, they're not decoration. They're infrastructure. As you step outside into the pre-gone chill, your ears still ringing with music and murmurs. It hits you. The revolution doesn't start in the streets. It starts here, in silk whispers and masked laughter. where women without titles dress like queens and treat kings like pawns. You don't need a crown to rule Paris. You just need the right dress and the right secrets. It's quiet now. The kind of heavy velvet silence that settles just before something tragic. You're walking through a rain-slicked boulevard in 1840s. Paris, fog curling around gas lamps like gossip with nowhere to go. And that's when you see her, Marie Duplessis, leaning against a carriage, laughing too brightly, coughing into her glove between sentences. Her eyes are rimmed in kohl, her lips like bitten cherries, and there's a shine to her skin that's more fever than glamour. She doesn't know it yet, or maybe she does, but her face is about to become the blueprint for doomed beauty. You feel something twist inside you. You've seen beauty used as a weapon. Now you're about to see it used as an elegy. Marie was born Alphonsine Plessis, the daughter of a violent Norman peddler. By 16, she had clawed her way into the Parisian demi-monde, using wit, charm, and perfect cheekbones as her business cards. She changed her name the way other girls changed gloves carefully, for effect. Marie read newspapers aloud in cafes, to appear educated. She dined alone in public to appear mysterious. And when she laughed, people leaned closer, not realizing they were already falling into the myth. According to Sex with Kings, there's a particular kind of courtesan who becomes more powerful in death than in life. Marie would be one of them, but not yet. Tonight, she's alive. Radiantly, recklessly alive. She's wearing white, a dangerous choice. Too bridal, too honest, but it's intentional. She's turned her illness into a trend. That pale, haunted look, now it's aspirational. The hollow cheeks, the delicate hands always clutching a handkerchief. Upper-class women start copying the look, applying light powder to mimic tuberculosis. Consumption becomes chic. You don't know whether to laugh or weep. Fashion has always had a dark side, but this is the first time it flirts so openly with death. Marie's gowns are modified for fragility. Silks draped like hospital sheets. Bodices that hang a little loose, suggesting weight loss and whispered tragedy. And the shawl, always the shawl. No one wears it like her, like it's both shield and surrender. Men fall hard for her. Poets, politicians, princes. Even Franz Liszt, the rock star pianist of the century, is reduced to a simpering wreck in her presence. But Marie keeps them at just the right distance, enough to be adored, never enough to be owned. That's her genius. She understands branding before the term exists. Her home is decorated like a stage set, everything positioned for maximum visual impact. Soft lighting, mirrors, velvet upholstery that flatters every skin tone. And her letters, written in a breathy, uncertain script, circulate in private collections like erotic relics. Historians still argue whether Marie was truly in control of her image or simply swept up in the machinery of Parisian spectacle. But the evidence is stitched into her wardrobe. A turquoise gown with silver embroidery becomes her signature. A perfume amber, lilac, and something faintly medicinal sells out within weeks. And of course, there's that final outfit, the one she's buried in. White muslin, blue ribbon, her favorite book clutched to her chest. Romantic even in death. There's a scene, maybe apocryphal, maybe not, that after her funeral, a noblewoman tried to commission the exact same dress to wear to a masquerade ball. When the designer hesitated, she reportedly said, "I want to be remembered like her." That's the power of Marie. She doesn't just pass through history, she lingers like perfume in a closed room. Her life inspires La Dame Camelias, which in turn inspires Verdi's La Traviata, and suddenly, across Europe, women are swooning theatrically, coughing delicately, and weeping into lace-trimmed handkerchiefs. It's emotional cosplay, performed in salons and theaters, all echoing one woman's slow fade into legend. But underneath the romance, there's rot. You can see it if you look close. Marie died at 23, buried with unpaid bills and unpaid lovers. Her belongings auctioned off like trinkets, her letters sold for gossip, her dresses resold to actresses. One fan ivory, hand-painted, a gift from a Russian diplomat, fetches more than her casket. There's something grotesque about it, like fashion vultures picking clean the bones of her myth. And yet, she'd probably understand. This is the price of becoming a symbol. You don't get to own your story anymore. Others will wear it, sing it, reinterpret it, and sell it back to the world. There's a lesser-known anecdote buried in an old Parisian broadsheet about a young seamstress who attended Marie's funeral in secret. She brought a single white camellia and left it on the grave, not because she knew her, but because she'd once stitched the hem of one of her gowns. She made us feel beautiful, the girl reportedly said. Even if it wasn't our beauty. That's the part people forget. Marie Duplessis didn't just sell herself, she sold fantasy. And for a brief, shimmering moment, it made everyone feel immortal. You're standing there now, watching the last carriage pull away from her tomb, and the street feels colder somehow. But the fashion lives on. In the slight droop of a shoulder, the cut of a gown meant to flutter when you breathe, the tragic tilt of a hat. Marie taught Paris how to die beautifully. And Paris, ever the eager student, has been rehearsing ever since. The dress is soft to the touch, too soft really. Velvet trimmed in sable, stitched with jet beads that catch the firelight like tiny eyes. You reach for it, wondering if it's allowed, and a voice behind you whispers, "Careful. That one ended a marriage and started a duel." You jerk your hand back, of course it did. You're in the back room of a private Parisian atelier in 1880, where couture isn't just tailored, it's whispered about. This isn't a boutique. It's a confessional booth with silk walls. And the gown in question? It belonged to a courtesan whose name has been delicately erased from polite memory. But the damage? That remains. You see, this dress isn't just fabric, it's gossip in physical form. It walked through a gala, brushing past 3 women who immediately recognized the cut, then saw who wore it, then saw their husbands looking. And just like that, scandal bloomed. The next day, one woman fainted publicly during mass, another left town for her nerves, and a gentleman was found with a cracked monocle and a bloodied nose. What's astonishing isn't that a dress could cause so much chaos, it's that it was designed to. That's the thing with haute couture in the hands of Parisian courtesans. It becomes weaponized. These women don't just wear fashion, they commission it like an artist might a manifesto. Every hemline is intentional, every button placed with subtext. And you're standing in the archives, touching history in the form of stitching. You're told this particular gown was designed by a young assistant working under Charles Frederick Worth, a name you'll hear more of soon. But this piece was special. The courtesan anonymous in records, legendary in whispers requested. A neckline that mimicked a rose in mid-bloom, slightly off-center, drawing the eye exactly where she wanted it. She paired it with gloves dyed in a shade called morning mist, and a diamond brooch shaped like a locked door. The symbolism? Not subtle. The message? You'll never quite get in, but you'll always want to. You think of her gliding into the gala, trailing scent and suggestion. She didn't need to speak. The gown spoke for her. That's how couture worked then. It wasn't about beauty. It was about broadcasting. But what made it lethal was who wore it. Courtesans could say things duchesses couldn't. More importantly, they could wear things duchesses wanted to, but didn't dare. And the designers, they noticed. According to surviving atelier logs, some of the most experimental and risk commissions came from these women, not nobility. Because while noble women had to preserve their status, courtesans were building theirs from scratch. They took risks. They paid in cash. And they weren't afraid to be remembered. There's a lesser-known tale recorded in a faded notebook by a Paris seamstress named Coletta, woman who hand-stitched under Worth in his early years. She described one particular courtesan who always arrived with her own sketches. Not rough ideas, actual designs, precise and annotated. She wanted slits high enough to scandalize, but not enough to ruin. Sleeves that distract from conversation. And trains that drag long enough to whisper regret. This woman didn't just influence fashion, she ghostwrote it. And yet her name appears nowhere in the official records. Historians still argue whether the influence of courtesans on couture was direct or merely inspirational. But behind closed doors, everyone knew who drove the trends. There's even a peculiar detail, the way certain dress styles were named. A particularly dramatic collar was dubbed the scandal collar, and a silhouette with a sharply cinched waist and flared skirt became known, unofficially, as the escape plan. These names never appeared in catalogs, but tailors and clients used them freely. It was code. You weren't just buying a look. You were buying a story, a rumor, a reputation. And then there's the accessories. One fur muff reportedly contained a hidden compartment, just big enough for a love letter, a flask, or a pearl-handled pistol. Quirky, yes, but also pragmatic. These women lived in a world where charm could save you, but preparation kept you alive. Another corset was rumored to be stitched with strands of gold thread from a nobleman's uniform, a gift, or perhaps a trophy. There's no way to prove it now. But the myth sticks. You turn back to the dress. It hangs limply now, just cloth and memory. But in its time, it moved through rooms like a rumor with a heartbeat. It changed hands, changed stories, and once, according to a cryptic note, it was stolen by a duchess, worn in secret, then burned after she was caught. Because the danger wasn't in being seen in the dress. The danger was in being seen as the kind of woman who would wear it. The line between courtesan and countess was often a hemline's difference. You leave the atelier with a strange ache. Not sadness exactly, more like awe. Because these women didn't have galleries. Their art walked into rooms and turned heads, then disappeared. Their signatures weren't painted, they were stitched. And while the world tried to forget their names, it remembered their silhouettes. You think, what else have we lost to polite history? And how much of what we still wear is stitched with the ghosts of women who refuse to be invisible? The corset cinches tighter than your breath, tighter than your doubts, tighter than the line between respectability and ruin. You're backstage now, behind the velvet curtain of a Parisian music hall, where rouge runs thick and champagne runs thin. It's 1895, and courtesans are center stage, not just figuratively, but literally draped in satin, laughing too loudly, and rewriting the anatomy of desire one wardrobe malfunction at a time. You can hear the crowd murmur beyond the curtain. You're here to learn about fashion, but fashion here is just a gateway drug. What you're really seeing is movement, the literal re-engineering of clothing for bodies that do more than just sit still and look decorative. Because corsets, despite their reputation, aren't just symbols of oppression. In the hands or waists of courtesans, they become tools of misdirection. You think a tight-laced bodice is about restriction, but it's actually theater. It highlights what it hides. It sculpts a silhouette that stops conversation. And once eyes are on the waist, no one notices the dagger smile, the whispered negotiation. The bracelet hiding a key. You notice a dancer lacing hers not with ribbon, but with silver cord, polished to catch the stage lights. Is it fashion or threat? Depends on who's watching. Tailors are adapting fast because these women need clothes that seduce and survive. The old aristocratic gowns, stiff with protocol, are out. Now it's all about mobility, breathability, and plausible deniability. You need to be able to run, to twirl, to duck behind a curtain before someone's jealous wife arrives. Historians still argue whether the loosening of 19th century dress codes was driven by political reform or just pure hedonism. But here behind the curtain, the answer is clear. Sex work demanded it first. The corset loosens not for ideology, but for logistics. There's a story, a sharp little gem buried in Peter Webb's notes of a courtesan named Lenny, who refused to wear corsets altogether. She claimed her natural waistline was scandalous enough. But when a count suggested she'd never make the papers without proper boning, she had a corset sewn with leather straps instead of whalebone, engraved with poetry verses, and wore it to a costume ball as her entire outfit. She was arrested for indecency. 3 days later, she received marriage proposals from 2 diplomats and an invitation to design stage costumes for a German opera. Lenny understood something: the world was just starting to grasp fashion wasn't merely about conformity or rebellion. It was narrative, a wearable manifesto. And courtesans, used to selling stories with their eyes, quickly learned to sell them with their hemlines too. By the late 1800s, new silhouettes were flooding the Parisian streets. Bell skirts gave way to bustles, which shrank again into the straight lines of what would soon become flapper style. But before those trends reached the respectable drawing rooms, they walked the red-lit boudoirs and gas-lamp cabarets. It was the working girls who tested the limits first. If a new cut allowed for quicker undressing, it was in. If a sleeve allowed a discreet reveal of the shoulder, it became a staple. One fringe trend was the illusion bodice, where nude mesh gave the impression of exposed skin without actually breaking modesty laws. It fooled priests, judges, and the occasional overexcited prince. And yes, the tailors were in on it. Because as the demand for movement grew, innovation followed. The underworld and the fashion world were starting to merge. Designers who once served duchesses were now sketching by gaslight for courtesans who paid in cash and champagne. And they didn't just request dresses, they requested transformations. A gown that could be loosened with a tug, a cloak with hidden pockets, a robe de chambre that doubled as stage costume. Even the makeup changed. Rouge became political. A heavily rouged cheek was no longer just provocative, it was a declaration. It said, "I am seen, and I don't need your approval." There's a wonderful detail from Michel Foucault's writings, a remark that sexuality in modernity becomes something to be studied, dissected, and publicly policed. But these women flipped that entirely. They turned their bodies into puzzles no scholar could quite explain. Their fashion didn't just invite the gaze, it demanded it, twisted it, mocked it. And in doing so, it taught generations of women how to dress not for men, but against them. Against their assumptions, their judgments, their laws. You're still backstage, watching the girls laugh and lean on each other, powdering noses and adjusting garters. Someone spills wine on a petticoat and doesn't even flinch. Because this is Paris, and stains are just stories waiting to be rewritten. One performer twirls in front of a mirror, admiring the way her dress flares. "It moves like I do," she says. That's the whole point. The corset didn't disappear, it evolved. So did everything else. Because women whose lives depended on the art of illusion weren't going to settle for being dressed. They had to dress smart, move smart, survive smart, that you step out from behind the curtain just as the music rises. The girls take their places, the lights flare, and for a moment, the audience doesn't breathe. Neither do you. Fashion here isn't just decoration. It's choreography, and the women wearing it? They aren't just courtesans. They're the architects of movement in a world still trying to keep them still. It smells like starch and ambition. You're in the cramped, chalk-dusted workroom of a Parisian tailor in the mid-19th century, and the man bending over a bolt of midnight blue silk has no idea he's about to change fashion history. His name is Charles Frederick Worth, and he's sweating through his waistcoat. Not from the heat, but because his most demanding client has just stormed in, draped in last season's sin, demanding something the world hasn't seen yet. And she's not a duchess. She's a courtesan. A very well-funded, very well-connected courtesan with strong opinions and an appetite for novelty. She paces like a general surveying a battlefield, trailing rosewater and rage. She doesn't just want a gown. She wants transformation. Worth's hand twitches toward his sketchbook. Something daring, she says, but elegant. I want to scandalize the room without giving them the satisfaction. That's the brief. And if he gets it right, she make him famous. Watch as the scene unfolds, the courtesan dictating details with the confidence of someone used to editing lovers like drafts. No bows, she snaps. I'm not a gift, Worth nods. He's listening, but more than that, he's learning. These women aren't just customers, they're muses, critics, provocateurs. While aristocrats hesitate, courtesans commission. They bring in their own sketches, mood boards scrawled on napkins, scraps of fabric stolen from stage curtains. They know what sells not to the masses, but to the elite who pretend they don't care. And slowly, the shift begins. Men start sewing for women who sin, and in doing so, invent modern fashion. Worth himself would go on to dress empresses, but it was the courtesans who gave him his first standing ovations. It wasn't just Worth. Paul Poiret followed, inventing the loose-waisted silhouette after watching the dancer-turned-courtesan move through a crowd like smoke. He realized then, clothing shouldn't imprison. It should glide. And so he tore up the corset playbook and sketched something fluid, scandalous, free. Guess who wore it first? Not the countess. Not the princess. But the woman whose body had already defied so many rules, it was practically a political statement. And yes, there were whispers. That's a courtesan's cut, someone sniffed. Exactly, someone else replied and ordered too. Historians still argue whether male designers truly respected these women, or simply capitalized on their visibility. But the record is clear, they needed them. Respectable women had to wait for trend permission. Courtesans made the permission. They walked into salons wearing silhouettes that hadn't even been named yet. Designers took notes. They understood the power of spectacle, of being just 1 inch outside the expected. If a dress showed too much ankle, it wasn't a flaw, it was a conversation starter. One designer's private diary preserved in a dusty museum. Archive describes a mysterious client, known only as She visited in twilight hours, her veil heavy, her scent unmistakable. She requested a gown with sleeves that could be rolled down for dinner and yanked up for mischief. She paid in gold coin. She never returned a fitting. But every woman in the city eventually wanted her look. And the designer? He became a household name. You begin to see the pattern. These women didn't just wear the future. They commissioned it. And then there's the politics. In a time when women couldn't vote, couldn't hold office, and were expected to exist like furniture, courtesans became style legislators. Through sheer force of personality and unapologetic spending, they forced the fashion world to adapt. They wanted gowns that moved like bodies, not chandeliers. They wanted boots that could survive a scandalous exit through the servants' entrance. They wanted hats with brims wide enough to shade intentions. And the men who sewed for them had to rise to the occasion. One fringe detail worth noting. Very first recorded use of the term haute couture appears in correspondence between Worth and a patron who was rumored to be a retired courtesan turned art collector. She demanded exclusive rights to a gown and threatened to ruin him deliciously if it was ever duplicated. That exclusivity, that idea of a design existing for one woman only, it came from her, not from royalty. From rebellion. There's also a whispered tale, unverified, but too poetic to ignore, that one designer learned to sew because his mother had been a courtesan, and he remembered watching her cry one night because a countess mocked her second-hand dress. He swore then to make garments that no one could sneer at. Every stitch would be armor. Every fabric would be forgiveness. And when his dresses finally appeared in society salons, no one dared ask who they were made for. They just wanted one. As you step back from the dress form, watching a young assistant pin the final seam on a crimson bodice shaped like a flame, it hits you. Fashion didn't trickle down from queens. It erupted from the margins, from women whose names were erased, but whose silhouettes remain. And the men who sewed for them? They weren't saviors, they were students. Apprentices to the oldest profession and the sharpest critics. Courtesans. Taught them how to dress a body that already knew how to command attention. The result? Couture, yes, but also revolution. You're flipping through the pages of a Parisian tabloid from 1902, the ink still smudging your fingertips, and suddenly, you stop. There she is again. Same woman, different name. Same silhouette, different scandal. This time, she's caught exiting a duke's townhouse wearing a dress slit high enough to reveal a single diamond-studded garter. And the headline reads, asterisk, Madame X rewrites the rules ... Again, you pause. Not because you're shocked, but because you recognize the pattern now. She's not the story. She's the structure the story needs. And the dress? That's the punchline, the proof, the bait. Welcome to the early 20th century, when the press isn't just reporting on fashion, it's building it. And right at the center of this gossipy cyclone, the courtesan. She's still here, only now she's being illustrated in full color. Her gowns annotated like crime scenes. Her wardrobe is a live feed. Her life, a serialized editorial dot. You start to notice the rhythm. First comes the public appearance, at a gala, an opera, a scandalous horse race. Then comes the fashion breakdown. Who she wore, how low the neckline dipped, what shade of forbidden's violet she dared to flaunt. Then the speculation, who she's sleeping with, who she's snubbing, what gesture meant what. And finally, the reaction, other women copying her out of admiration and condemning her out of fear. It's performance layered with performance. And the stage? Every newspaper stand in Paris. What's striking isn't just that these women became fashion icons. It's that they did it without approval. They didn't wait for Vogue to anoint them. They were the cover before there was a cover. One gossip rag from 1905 ran a recurring column called Sins in Silk, where they diagram what notorious women wore to events, complete with sketches and snide commentary. The paper claimed moral outrage. Sales said otherwise. There's one clipping in particular that stands out, an illustration of a courtesan identified only as the Marquise of Midnight. She's shown stepping out of a carriage in a dress that blends Edwardian propriety with something indecently Grecian. The article mocks her for excessive décolletage, but devotes 3 full paragraphs to describing her shoes. 3 months later, that shoe-style pearl-buckled, pointed toe, deep wine leather sells out across the city. Historians still argue whether this media fascination reflected genuine admiration or thinly veiled control. But the result was the same. The public couldn't look away. The tabloids turned intimacy into spectacle. They made private life the new catwalk. And for courtesans, this was a double-edged feathered hat. Be too elegant, and you were seen as threatening. Be too brazen, and you were disposable. But hover just right between art and scandal, and you could live forever in print. There's even a strange little trend that pops up during this time. Paper dolls modeled after famous courtesans. You could buy them at kiosks, cut out silhouettes in satirical outfits, complete with miniature accessories. One doll came with a detachable boa, said to represent moral ambiguity. Another included a foldable fan labeled, "Denial." It's campy. It's cruel. And it's brilliant marketing. Because if you can dress her, you think you own her. But she knows better. She's controlling the narrative, even in cardboard form. Meanwhile, fashion houses catch on. They begin feeding tips to gossip journalists, leaking sketches, staging accidental sightings of sample gowns on the right woman at the wrong party. It's symbiosis. The courtesan gets visibility. The designer gets clients. The public gets a fantasy. Everyone wins, except maybe the socialites who realize too late that their husband's mistress debuted. Next season's look before they did. One designer's memoir recalls an incident where 2 women wore the same gown to a winter gala. One, a countess, the other a notorious courtesan. The press ran photos of them side by side for days. The countess's dress was labeled derivative. The courtesans? Iconic. The rise of photography only accelerates the chaos. Suddenly, images replace innuendo. A single shot of a woman entering the Ritz wearing a new sleeve cut or an unfamiliar silhouette could trigger weeks of analysis. Was it Russian? Was it subversive? Was it morning couture or just emotional detachment made stylish? One grainy photo of a woman in sheer black voile, her face half hidden by a mesh veil, caused such an uproar that 3 parishes preached sermons about the decay of modesty. She sold the look to a theatrical costumer the next day. Quirky footnote: some women reportedly carried small stones in their handbags not for defense, but to make a loud clack on the pavement that would draw attention to their entrance. That sound? The original clickbait. You start to understand. This isn't just about clothing anymore. It's about timing, placement, headline management. Fashion and gossip have fused into a single weapon wielded with grace, wrapped in tulle. And courtesans, trained in the art of entrance and escape, are the only ones agile enough to master it. Their lives become serialized entertainment, a blend of shame and awe, moral caution and aesthetic worship. And through it all, they keep dressing better than anyone else. You fold the paper, smudging lipstick red ink across your palm, and realize the line between muse and model is long gone. The courtesans are no longer just influencing fashion. They are fashion. And their scandal? That's just the press release. You can still smell the powder. Not the kind they used in wigs centuries ago, but the trace of No. 5, lingering in a velvet-lined hallway, floating like memory down the mirrored corridors of Rue Cambon. It's 1921. Paris has changed. The monarchy is gone. Corsets are loosening, and yet something of the old seduction survives. You're stepping into the salon of Coco Chanel, and though she greets you with a smile, you feel it, the presence of ghosts. Women who came before her, not draped in tweed but in scandal. Their names don't hang on storefronts, but their silhouettes are stitched into everything Chanel sells. You try to shake the feeling after all. Coco is the queen of modern elegance, not some boudoir relic, and yet, the simplicity of her lines, the unapologetic boldness of black, the rumor that No. 5 smells faintly like clean skin after a night of sweat and silk. She's not erasing the courtesans. She's channeling them. Coco never called herself one, of course, but her early patrons knew better. She spent her youth among mistresses and performers, drifting between luxury and dependence, absorbing the language of survival. When she stripped away the frills of Belle Epoque fashion, she wasn't just rebelling against structure, she was stripping aristocracy of its costume. In a world obsessed with decoration, she made absence seductive. And the courtesans? They understood that long before Chanel was even born. They knew that leaving something to the imagination wasn't modesty, it was strategy. Historians still debate whether Coco's minimalism was driven by feminist instinct or financial constraint. But one thing is clear, she didn't invent understated luxury. She just rebranded it for women who now had to earn their own power instead of marrying. Into it. And the perfume, that iconic No. 5, designed with synthetic aldehydes to mimic something abstract, something intimate yet impersonal. It doesn't smell like flowers. It smells like skin you've already touched. Chanel herself once said, "A woman who doesn't wear perfume has no future." But the future she designed smelled eerily like the past, specifically, the past of women who had always lived in the gray space between scandal and style. There's even an old perfume ledger in a private collection that shows a spike in No. 5 sales in the Montmartre district, an area once thick with courtesans, dancers, and mistresses. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe those women recognized something in the scent, a memory, a warning, a mirror. You walk the streets now, years later, Dior is rising. So is Balenciaga. The war has come and gone. But the codes haven't changed, not really. The waistlines shift, the fabrics modernize, but the game? Still the same. A woman walks into a room wearing something that whispers too loudly, and heads turn. The difference now is that the courtesan has been renamed. She's the muse, the model, the it girl. Her backstory is sanitized, her agency polished. She appears on runways and magazine covers, photographed in gowns that owe everything to women who weren't allowed to be photographed at all. One designer even admits in a moment of rare honesty that his favorite silhouette is based on a 19th century painting of a courtesan reclining with a robe, just barely covering her hips. He says it's timeless. He doesn't say her name. There's a fringe fashion exhibit you stumble upon, tucked in a gallery no one visits on Sundays. It's called Whispers in Silk, and it features replicas of outfits worn by famous mistresses. Many anonymous, all recreated from letters, sketches, and secondhand gossip. There's one gown, deep green with gold embroidery shaped like broken keys, that allegedly belonged to a woman who seduced a foreign ambassador to prevent a war. The hem still holds the shape of her stride. Another black lace over violet satin was worn by a woman expelled from 4 countries, but always allowed back into Paris. You stand there, watching visitors murmur about how ahead of their time these pieces are, and you wonder, ahead of whose time? The fashion industry still mines their legacy. It just does so with cleaner labels. Courtesan energy rebranded as empowerment. Scandal curated as runway theme. But make no mistake, those early women walked so Chanel could glide, so Galliano could shock, so Gaultier could experiment. They turned bodies into art, clothes into declarations, and gossip into influence. And though their names were often buried, their blueprints remain in every plunging neckline, every architectural heel, every scent that clings too long to skin. One final story. Unverified, like most good ones. A woman in her 80s, dressed in vintage couture, sits alone at a cafe near Place Vendôme. A tourist asks if she used to be a model. She smiles. "I was a scandal," she replies, then disappears before they can ask more. No name, no photo, just a perfume trail and a rumor. That's how these women live on, not in museums, but in stories, in silhouettes, in secrets that still shimmer under streetlights. And now you know. The next time you see a headline about a woman's outfit, the next time a scent stops you in your tracks, or a dress seems to tell a story you don't quite understand, listen. There's a courtesan whispering through the seam. She never left. She just changed her name. End of script. Sweet dreams.